How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the Schredz Show. Schredz Fitness here with Joe Klemczewski, one of the greatest coaches to ever touch bodybuilding, with more accolades that I could even touch on here, or else we'd be here for a very long time. Joe, do you mind giving a little intro for yourself?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me. Appreciate so much what you're doing for this next generation of up and coming competitors and people who are just looking for their best physical lives and health. And I've probably said this too many times already, but I have such a great interest in your career because I see a lot of myself in you when I was your age, and I made a decision early on in college to change direction from business and marketing to physical therapy. And back in those days, exercise science wasn't really a thing yet. And so that was kind of my way to start getting into fitness as an entrepreneurial profession. So around the same time I finished my first doctorate in nutrition, I had become a pro drug-free bodybuilder with the WNBF. And I began writing for fitness magazines and creating different concepts that were a little bit counterintuitive than people had encountered before. So when it comes to contest prep and even the entire concept of flexible dieting, things that I was creating along the way, I was introducing not only to my own clients in the Midwest, but also to an international audience through those fitness magazines. So that started a really fun and amazing career for me 25 years ago. And I see you sitting in that same spot now, taking the baton to that next generation. So just so excited to know you and be a part of what you're doing.
Yeah, I am so grateful to have you on. I definitely wanted to have a very knowledgeable coach on, to kind of answer some questions. I wanted to think about like, okay, someone who is or who was sitting in my shoes maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, looking to maybe compete, they're like just full on dedicated and are really looking to take that next step. But they have these like burning questions that like the internet just tells them like 20 million different things, and they have no idea what's true and what's not. So I wanted to go through some questions that I think would be really beneficial for some of the younger guys out there, who are just really looking for some answers and want to further their careers and just be the best version of themselves. So let's hop right into it.
Awesome.
All right. So when a client asks you about alcohol consumption, off season versus prep, growing muscle versus like getting started, like what are your like general thoughts on alcohol consumption? Because like almost everybody in college, faces this, I want to go out with my friends and have fun, but when I do, it also hinders my training, and I don't look as good as I could, and like, is it hindering my progress as much as I think it is? And I just wanted to see what a coach would say to that.
Yeah, there are two tracks that my brain immediately latches onto. And that is, you said it perfectly in that, is it hindering me? I have these goals. Is this hindering me? And anything counter physiologically to your goal, you would have to objectively say, yes, that's a hindrance. But how much? Maybe not as much as you think, unless you're pounding down a case of beer 6 days a week, and you can't train properly. But every once in a while, even though through research we could say that yes, alcohol not the greatest thing for muscle recovery, and definitely hits your nervous system and your immune system in a way that makes it a little bit tougher for you to rebound from. But there are probably a lot of other things you could do just as poorly, like getting a night or two of less sleep than you need. And so I would say, keeping it in perspective, yes, if your goal truly is great physical health and the most progress you can make, then limit it. Be smart. That's not your best path every day, not your best choice. But the other thing is also, if you're in a competitive situation and you're tracking macros and everything matters when it comes to accuracy and objectively, make sure you track it properly. Clients I have to this day, if you're going to do a shot of tequila, let's look at the fact that that has 86 calories. And even though ethyl alcohol isn't counted as a macronutrient, and so you can look this up on food count sources, and it's going to say, oh, there's 0 grams of fat, 0 grams of carbs. Well, where are those 86 calories coming from? So you have to decide, since alcohol has around 7 calories per gram, different than fat or carbs, and it's its own thing, then we have to make a decision to track it some way. So I tell my clients, look, you can divide calories by 4 and count it as carbs. You can divide it by 9 and count it as fat, your choice, but at least track it and be objective. It's not something that just didn't happen. But in moderation, absolutely be a college student, be whoever you are, and enjoy a little bit.
Would that change if someone was in prep? Because, as you're dieting down and you're getting leaner and you're trying to preserve as much muscle as possible, and those alcohol calories could be going towards, protein or carbs to fuel your workouts. Would you even tell people that are in deep into contest prep that they could still have alcohol, or at some point would you cut it out completely?
Yeah, that's my answer again, is how bad do you want this? Because I'm somebody who would even give up artificial sweetener. I wouldn't have diet soft drinks. I would do that kind of thing because I just want to make sure when I'm standing on that stage, there was nothing left undone. And so if you could have consumed those calories in a better, more quality way, then I think you left a little bit, that you could have attained otherwise. But I also want to say that in terms of prep, just like fructose, a lot of people say, oh, don't eat fruit because fructose can't replenish glycogen, muscle glycogen. And so that's a bad thing. Well, it does have to go through your liver to be converted to glucose. And some of it is therefore converted to fat first. And it may be not the most efficient source of carbohydrate, but there are still some unbelievably redeeming values and so forth. But just knowing that physiology is important. And I would say the same thing about alcohol. The reason people get cirrhosis and fatty liver and so forth is because your body can't use ethyl alcohol. So your liver converts it almost automatically to fat unless you can really utilize those calories in that instant, which is unlikely. You're sitting in a bar or in a dorm room, you're not using a lot of calories. So, it's truly not your best macronutrient for fitness and training and body composition.
All right. So I think to sum that up, basically, um, especially in prep, limit it as much as you can, because you definitely want to be able to utilize those calories in other senses, for energy and preserving muscle. In the off season, however, or even just lifestyle, limit it, but have a balance. Don't be too strict on yourself, but if you can, try not to drink a lot and then eat, because as Joe said, your body can't process the alcohol, and it basically stops digestion while the alcohol is going through your system. So any food you eat after that,
Well, it
bad
depends
news.
on your goals too, because
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't want to say,
absolutely.
hey, everybody go drink on an empty stomach and just get totally wasted.
Yeah.
We don't want to say that.
There's a balance to everything. So just be careful, but have a good balance. But yeah. All right. So that answers that. So in terms of kind of leading into the lifestyle versus getting ready for a show, you kind of touched on tracking macros. So it sounds like you're a coach who more leans towards the sides of macros. So what is your stance on macros versus a full-on meal plan, for getting ready for a show versus a lifestyle client?
Yeah, I think again, you need a little bit of both. And, being the guy who brought macro-based tracking into this industry 25 plus years ago, I mean, of course, I'm a fan of the objectivity and the accuracy that gives you. But at the same time, when people look at it as just a point of flexibility, like, hey, look, as long as I track my macros, I can have Twinkies and Snickers bars all day long, and that's going to be my carb source. And I've seen people do this, like just to make a point. They've said, okay, I'm going to have pizza and donuts every day through prep and show you that a calorie is just a calorie. I can still get just as lean as I want. And I'm like, yeah, again, biologically you can, but is that really
How
the
did they
point?
look?
Yes. Is that the health principle that you want to live by? So I think, especially getting started for a lot of clients, it works best to have some solid meal planning guidance. There are values and principles that are good. There are food quality issues, there are food timing issues, But do you also need the ability to be flexible? Absolutely. So I just find that the people, the competitors, the clients who do the best have a really stable foundation of structure. They've got their go-to meals, they've got things they can rely on. It makes their progress and their results much more predictable and consistent. But they also, they can bob and weave with the punches as they come, and they can be flexible.
No, absolutely. I actually, I'm more meal plan myself just because I've found that once you find foods that digest with you, kind of straying from that can like lead to some gray waters where you might run into some foods that don't digest as well. And if you're eating like 4 different meals a day and you don't really know where that's coming from. So I've always been a big fan of having like a very like structured meal plan. However, with all my clients, I put a meal plan, but I also give them macros for each meal so that they have that flexibility. So, even if like they have access to the food that I've given them to eat, if they're just, if they just need that flexibility, if they're feeling like tied down, if they're feeling, trapped in this, same everyday structure, they have that flexibility to go macro based. But I've always found personally, well, from the short time I've been in the industry so far, that meal plans have like worked better for me with that little bit of flexibility. So, sounds very similar to your
Yeah.
approach as well.
And I'll change meals once in a while. I'll get on a kick, and my breakfast is the same for several weeks, and it's like, hey, I want to do something different, getting bored, and you change it up. But still, there's a lot of reliability just baked into the cake when you can rely on that structure.
No, absolutely. All right, let's go into the next. So, in terms of muscle growth, optimal muscle growth, what is your ideal frequency and volume? Now, I know we've touched on this before. There is no best. However, what have you found to work with most of your clients in terms of frequency and volume, and how to split it up in different days?
Mhm. So yeah, this is a little bit controversial just in the fact that it kind of changes era to era depending on whose voices are the loudest in the industry. And I'm just, gosh, I don't want to date myself and sound, so old school that I don't know what's going on now, but I still like exhausting muscle tissue to a point where you create the greatest adaptive response, but then you have the responsibility of knowing that it takes a little more time to recover. And if you go all the way back to research in the 60s and 70s, and when a lot of bodybuilders were just experimenting, these were topics. These were things. Should you train a muscle group once a week or twice a week? How many sets? And all of these things were being hashed out. Now you translate that to some of the exercise science labs and the formal research happening. And we can say that for, the typical person with a typical experience level, total volume matters as much as anything. So if you're going to say, I'm going to do this many sets for my quads or my legs in a week, well, if you break it up into 2 workouts or 1 or 3, there's not that much difference. But I think it does matter in the long run because of your ability to stay fresh and strong and progress week to week. And just like structure versus flexibility in nutrition, I think you got to start out with a good game plan, but then be ready to adjust. If you need an extra day off or you need kind of a deload week, take it. But I'm somebody who will take major muscle groups and major lifts like a squat or a deadlift and say there's no way you can do that more than once a week. If you need kind of a light, auxiliary day, that's fine. Go through the motions, activate the muscle a little bit, but you can't go in and disrupt that recovery cycle so deeply that you just keep going further and further into overreach or overtraining. So I tend to vacillate between kind of 3, 4, and 5 day work weeks. So for maybe a month or two, I'll train 3 times a week because I feel like I need that extra recovery. Maybe my nutrition is solid, kind of leaning into a surplus, so I can really work on heavy squatting, heavy deadlifting, and I want that extra time in recovery. Then all of a sudden you feel like, okay, I'm really kind of maxing out my strength, and I kind of miss those extra days, so I want to maybe do chest twice a week or pull my arms out onto their own day. And now you're back into training 4 and 5 days a week. And you can run that for a month or two before you feel like now you need to back off a little bit. So it's just a never ending management of your micro and your mesocycles in training, and all the variables you discussed. You mentioned, volume, intensity, duration, like all of those are the variables that you have to keep in the mix. But I really, go back to your first statement, Joe, which is there's no perfect recipe. It's just how you're going to manage all of those yourself individually.
Exactly. So I caught something pretty interesting. You said three days and then 4 to 5 days. So I know a lot of people nowadays, especially a lot of the younger guys, think more is better. I mean, hell, I did for the longest time. I when I first got into competing for, I'd probably say 2 years straight, I was training, 6 or 7 days a week, 7 days a week for a while there, because I believed that I was giving my muscles enough time to recover, not realizing my nervous system was shot as well. So that needed rest. So would you say like any more than 5 days might be counterproductive in terms of recovery? Like you need at least like 2 good recovery days a week?
It does depend on your goals, because I know kind of the Brett Contreras effect in the industry now. A lot of women bikini competitors want to train their glutes 4 and 5 days a week. And like you said, everybody wants to be in the gym every day. And so even if it's a light day, they still want to do something. So I don't discount the fact that you can have some lighter workouts that are just more functional, active recovery and light work. But when you're really grinding toward progress and you want that adaptive response to be as massive as possible, and if you remember, us talking last time about, how this actually works down to the muscle fiber, every individual muscle fiber has these lengths, these sections of sarcomeres, and you have the actin and myosin filaments. And the mechanism of shortening those muscle fibers at those junctions, like that's all there is. That's the whole ball game. And so the amount of force you can generate in that shortening process is what leads to exercise selection, biomechanics, angles. How can you create the most force through those sarcomeres, through those myofilaments, and then let it recover? And if you're just doing it with light weights, it would be like saying, well, let's do 1,000 reps of bicep curls with 10 pounds or 1 pound instead of 5 reps of 10 with 60-pound dumbbells or something. Like, what's going to give you more? And then all of a sudden you get into the energy systems and the muscle fiber types. And so again, a lot of variables, but if you're constantly training 6-7 days a week, and the overlap between the training, the muscle groups, I just don't think you'll ever see your full potential.
Right. No, I completely agree. As soon as I backed off and started training like 4 to 5 days a week, I noticed biggest improvements in such a short amount of time, especially being, natural. You don't really see those big jumps very often, but, as soon as I backed off, started getting my body time to recover, I think I found my sweet spot. And you kind of touched on the amount of reps. So for instance, doing like 1,000 reps of bicep curls with very lightweight is not going to be as adaptive as, going for a heavier weight and getting in that 6 to 12 hypertrophy rep range. So there's a lot of stuff to play around with. And I say 6 to 12 just because that's kind of like the standard people have come up with. But, for example, for legs, your legs can handle a lot more volume. So maybe up into even the 20 rep range. So there's a lot of stuff that you can kind of play around with. But in terms of just like giving you guys like a baseline, I would say, take at least 1 to 2 rest days a week, especially I would say even maybe 2 to 3 if you're absolutely training to failure. If you're fairly new to the gym and, you're not really sure where that failure threshold is yet, I would say err on the side of a little bit more volume just until you figure that out, because as your intensity rises, you're going to want to back off the volume a little bit. But if your intensity is not there, the volume will help you progress a lot faster. But regardless, make sure you're taking your rest days. And guys, I know it's hard to stay out of the gym. Once you get that itch, it's very hard to break. But rest days are so important. So thank you for answering that, Joe. That
No,
was
for
awesome.
sure.
So kind of touching on that, I just mentioned like the rep range for hypertrophy. Um, and like I kind of want to lead into, everybody talks about, like you have like, for example, Ronnie Coleman. He was a power lifter before he was a bodybuilder. And a lot of people give him credit for like his incredible physique because he was a power lifter and because he was strong when he first started out. So what's your take on if the end goal is to be a bodybuilder, what is your ideal foundation for someone to work on strength versus hypertrophy? So if someone's like just starting out in the gym, should they train for hypertrophy if they want to be a bodybuilder? Or should they almost train to be a powerlifter even though they want to be a bodybuilder in the future?
This is a great topic, and I think there's a lot of value in some of today's top researchers who started out in bodybuilding and then they got into powerlifting, or even vice versa. But it's really tough to find some of the top academic bodybuilders now who don't also love and promote powerlifting. And physiologically, when you get into those rep ranges of power work or strength work, there is tremendous value. When you look at the cross-sectional potential of muscle fiber, what's going to give you the most growth, it is the fast twitch muscle fibers that you want, lower rep ranges and more force or power output, per rep. And I think for a lot of people, that's just fun. I mean, it's tough, like you said, not just to stay out of the gym, but not to want to do those 1 and 2 rep maxes and just see that strength progress. And I often wonder, looking back at my own career, I was always somewhat careful because not only just kind of conservative as a personality trait, but then I was also an orthopedic physical therapist, so I knew all the physiology and the dangers of injury. So I was a little bit cautious even into my 30s. And then I just got on this kick where I worked with a powerlifting coach, and I had some friends who were on the U.S. strongman team, and it was just game on. It was, let's get my squat up to 500 pounds, let's get my deadlift up to 500 pounds. And I can't say that I've had injuries because of that, but you do see that take its toll. If you're going to do that kind of powerlifting work for decades, and especially, you bring up Ronnie Coleman, where you're using PEDs. And so now your skeletal system and your joints necessarily are not going to take the kind of load that your muscle can create, then, you end up with all kinds of orthopedic problems. I mean, that guy's in a freaking wheelchair now, and, at barely 50 years old. I don't think he's even 50 years old. And like, I'm pretty sure if you asked him, hey, do you think you could have backed it up just a little bit? Maybe not squat 900 pounds, or, leg press 3,000 pounds, maybe just a little bit less, and you'd still have your health and your longevity. Would that be a good trade? I think he would say, yeah, I could have done that.
Really quick, there was actually an interview where someone asked if he had any regrets.
He probably said
Um,
no.
he said his only regret was he wished he squatted 800 pounds for one more rep.
Yeah. See, again, that's the mindset that we all struggle with,
It
because we
really
want to
is.
do that.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting though. So okay, take out the PEDs and your skeletal system not being able to bear that kind of load as a natural. So
Mhm.
there's that natural threshold where, I mean, hell, there's a lot of strong naturals out there, but in terms of being natural, you're not going to progress as quickly. So do you think that there's a difference in that, like in terms of longevity, for a natural bodybuilder to also power lift? Like, do you?
I, I think you really, I think first of all, it does help. Like, you will get better density, and even with your hypertrophy work, if you're increasing your strength work, then you can do hypertrophy work with more weight, which leads to more hypertrophy. So there is that staggered stair-stepping incremental approach that's necessary, but you also have to focus on the longevity piece. You can't let yourself get injured. And so just being a little bit more cautious. And, I'll give you an example. I mean, I have not competed in more than a decade, and I'm 50, years old. And I still want to train as heavy and as aggressively as possible. And I was all set up for a deadlifting workout. And I mean, this was deadlifting day. I still get excited. My heart rate's 150 walking to the gym, and I'm just ready to smash it.
Man, what
And
kind of
all the
pre-workout you take?
and this is life, man. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I've not done anything in my life longer than lifting weights. Like I've been lifting weights for 42, 43 years consistently. And there's just, I don't know, man, there's a connection there to movement and health and functionality I'll just never give up. But this particular workout, I'm like, I'm getting into it. I'm like, gosh, man, I just don't feel it. Like I'm a little stiff. I'm a little sore. I just haven't recovered as well as I thought I did from my leg workout 2 or 3 days ago. And so I just canned it. I'm like, well, you know what? I warmed up, and I'm only 2 or 3 sets in. I'm gonna switch over and do chest or something, and I'll just save deadlifts for tomorrow when I know I'm fresh. Sure enough, that extra day of recovery, even though I had to change my calendar a little bit, I went in and had the workout I wanted. But had I just forced myself and said, no, this is my strength day, I got to do it, it could have been an injury. And sometimes those injuries are life altering, career ending injuries. So you just have to respect the heavy work. You have to be unbelievably perfect with your form and do not compromise, because like I said, once you have that injury, life is different, and you're going to regret it.
Absolutely. Yeah, guys, even with heavyweight, form is still most important. And seriously, just listen to your body. Don't, especially with like the heavy work, as Joe said, like just don't force that. If you're feeling a little something, like a little tired, that's, you might be able to push through with some like hypertrophy work. But if it's your heavy squat day, if it's like your deadlift day, be careful, guys. Just like I said, pay attention to your bodies. All right, so let's transition into bulking. So how, in your opinion, what do you tell your clients in terms of how much do you bulk your clients? Are you more on the side of um, getting as big as you can and then putting on as much muscle, but like even if you have like a good amount of fat, like it doesn't really matter, just get as heavy as you can? Or do you like to say leaner and put on that gradual muscle? Or do you think it's literally like per person, like completely individual?
These are really good questions. You
Thank you.
said you wanted to pick out some things that younger up and comers would want to hear about, and this is a great one. So you also have to think in terms of your overall career arc, the trajectory of your physical career, competitive career, lifting career, as incremental. And you're not going to get everything you need in one season. And there are developmental steps. You have to get your body conditioned. Even, I mean, we think in terms of these microcycles, like here's what I want to accomplish in these next 4 to 6 weeks, and this is what I'm going to look like in September, and blah blah blah. We don't often think about, what's a decade of training going to do for my body? What's the second and the third decade, and what's possible, and what is the best path forward through all of these variables? And just to, let your body fat go up to 30% every single off season or every year, and then have to diet that back off is very counterproductive, because the amount of time that you have to spend dieting more aggressively or for longer spans of time, that's all catabolic time that you're now not only wasting, that could be longer off seasons, but you'll never show up in your peak condition better after that kind of season. But I will say, some people, especially like an ectomorph, they really have a hard time gaining. And even though I'm definitely not an ectomorph, I can remember in my early and mid 20s, it was really hard to get up to 170, 175 pounds. I had to work like a maniac. And then I thought, man, just wait till next year, 2 years later, I'm going to get up to 180 and then 185. And it took me probably 10 or so years to be able to reach an off-season weight of 200 pounds. And I mean, I was eating heart-stopping levels of food, to get myself there. And I was not an ectomorph. But those particular times when I was able to surge just a little bit higher, so that's when my core lifts, deadlift, squat, et cetera, would jump appreciably. So I let myself have longer off seasons. Sometimes I would not compete for a couple years, and I would kind of plug in those particular off seasons when I would let myself get a little heavier. Then I might compete every year for 2 or 3 years. So I couldn't get as heavy. And I was kind of working on the competitive aspect. I was learning the stage, learning how to pose, learning how to diet, learning how to prep. But then there were also those times to say, okay, now I'm going to bury myself in a 2 or 3 year off season to really make progress. And I will say developmentally, Joe, that there are some advantages to every once in a while getting a little bit heavier than you might be comfortable. And this is for pure anabolic growth reasons. You don't need this to build muscle, but when you're especially a guy who wants the most muscle possible, I think there are advantages to a couple times in your life spending those longer off seasons packing on the weight and letting your body get used to power lifter type structure. And then you'll see that again incrementally over time, developmentally, you've made some big steps forward.
So wrapping that into and kind of concluding the powerlifting question, do you periodize your powerlifting based around like your surpluses? So like I've noticed like in the off season, like right now, my coach and I will spend like a certain period of time growing. And then as soon as I get like a little bit like too heavy, like where like, I'm still strong and like or get like I'm very strong, like at its peak. But my condition might be getting a little bit out. We'll just pull back, do a little mini cut, and then push again. But then we do have those longer growing phases where we do get a little heavier. So it sounds like very similar where it's not, I don't spend my entire off season, walking around 225, like with my gut out and everything, you know what I mean? But there are those times where we do push that threshold and push that limit, and then pull back, spend some time like bouncing in between and then push. So like those lifts go up. So when it sounds kind of similar to what you kind of said. So when do you periodize your powerlifting around your off season? Because I mean, it kind of sounds like you don't really powerlift too much in prep because that could cause a lot of injuries. You're in a deficit and everything. So in your off season, like how often do you block your powerlifting, or is it like 2 powerlifting days like earlier in the week and then 3 hypertrophy days? Or is it like you spend like 3 months powerlifting and then switch to bodybuilding? Like what's
That's
your
that's another great question, and I'm probably a little bit unique in the fact that I like to consider everything through the eyes of a bodybuilder first. And so I'm not a pure strength athlete. If I were coaching a power lifter, I would say we need some extra consultation in the mix here because there are probably some people who are better at this than me. But when it's in terms of how do you grow the most muscle tissue and incorporate those powerlifting principles, I do exactly like you said, where I want the heaviest work to be in a calorie surplus. Um, but there are also a couple other times when recovery is important. So this particular contest season, when we're recording this, is just over, is finished, and so a lot of my athletes are done for the year, and they're hitting an off season. It could be a 6 month off season or a year. But one of the things I want to see is let's get food intake up slowly. Let's get you in the gym feeling better rested and recovered, and then I want to start this surge where we're increasing calories incrementally, and you're going to see that that's a great wave to ride with the strength. And I remember doing this, Joe, when I wanted to get my squat up to 500 pounds. My previous best was in the low fours, and I did the same thing. I chose to pick, okay, I'm post contest now, so I'm ready for this massive upward swing. And I ended up kind of scheduling a gain. So I wanted to gain half a pound a week body weight or 2 pounds a month.
Mhm.
And I gave myself 6 months to go through this powerlifting block where I would do a max squat every 2 weeks. So of course I'm training legs more often than that, but that was the time where that gut check measurement was in place. And I met those tandem goals perfectly through the whole 6 months. So it was like 2 pounds a month, 2 pounds a month, 2 pounds a month, 2 pounds a month, and my body weight. And every 2 weeks, my squat was going up 10 pounds, 10 pounds, 10 pounds, 10 pounds. Now, in those alternate weeks, I did not want to tax even that movement. And so I would do other things. I would do leg press and hack squats and other things, a lot of higher intensity work, so that my strength block was every 2 weeks. And at that point, I was just training 3 days a week. So kind of an upper body pull, upper body push, and lower body, squat. And again, once I'd met that goal, I was definitely not going to go any higher. So then it was time to pull back a little bit. Let's keep squatting, but now let's flip the script a little bit. And then I was doing a high intensity squats. So I'll do some heavy work in the hacks and the leg press, but now I want to give this squat, the biomechanics a break, the nervous system, everything, reduce my risk of injury. So now I want to build in what I would call kind of endurance and intensity training for that movement. Because if you can squat 200 pounds 100 times consecutively, you're going to be much safer squatting 500 pounds for 1 or 2 reps. And what a lot of people do mistakenly is just always train heavy with those compound movements, saving them for the strength work. And you should do some supersets with that work. You should do some drop sets. You should do some crazy gut check intensity work once in a while to build in that resilience for that movement. My particular powerlifting coach, when I worked with one, he himself held a world record in the squat. He himself had coached 2 Division I powerlifting teams to back-to-back national championships. He was the first coach in NCAA history to have every single weight class squat over 600 pounds. So this guy knew how to squat.
Yeah.
And he told me, out of every single person he's ever coached, he said, I was the only person that he's ever met that when we had a max scheduled, I was always going to hit it. He said, if you could get under that bar or get the bar moving off the floor, the rep was always going to be finished. There was never a rep that I dumped. And I think more than anything, Joe, it's that style of training. It's that I've always done super high intensity, aggressive work in those compound movements along with the strength work. So there's a lot of periodization happening on multiple levels that I think are just physiologically important.
Okay. All right. So in terms of, let's say someone sets up their training split as like a push pull legs, and they're training like 4 to 5 days a week. So they'll do like push pull legs, push pull legs. And um so I'm trying to like put this in context for someone. You said like max every like 2 weeks, and like I know a lot of people right now, they're in the gym, like every time they touch a bar for bench, they're maxing out. Every time they get under a squat, they're trying to hit their 1 rep max, and like that's definitely not the way to go about it. There's definitely like periodization as you said. So, and you kind of touched on every 2 weeks. So if someone, I'm trying to think. So if in that powerlifting block, like when you would max out, would you then drop the weight and still do hypertrophy work with squats? Or would you literally just do like your 1 to 2 reps of squat and then?
I love to, I do a lot of warm-ups. And so I'm inadvertently doing some hypertrophy work. So I'll give you an example in that block. I would do, and a lot of my clients, if I'm working on their training with them, I mean, they'll see some of these principles still in play to this day. But I would do the upper body pull early in the week. So let's say it's, I'm deadlifting and it's a Monday. That way I've got Wednesday, which would be my shoulders and chest and so forth. So then by the time I get to my squats on Friday, any low back fatigue or anything from deadlifts, that's kind of done. And if you do it the opposite, I think you'll recognize this, but when you squat aggressively and heavy, I mean, your adductors, your low back, your hamstrings. I mean, you have a hard time even standing up from a chair for several days. So to be that sore from squats and then try to deadlift 4 or 5 days later, it's always harder. It's you're not going to get the best deadlift. So I found deadlifting early in the week, 5 days later squatting. Then I had a 2 week cycle. So then I'm not deadlifting or squatting until that next following Monday. But in my squats, to your points, I'm doing a bar, for 20 reps. And then I'm maybe doing 95 pounds for 20 reps and then 135 for 20 reps. And then, I may go up, 185 and then 225 before I ever start backing down to 5 rep sets. And I always learned, this is a system more from the early European block, but a lot of set and rep schemes get floated around. And I always liked having a 2 to 3 set kind of 5 rep window. So kind of a 5-5-5-2 or 5-5-5-1, something like that. And that allowed you to practice with your weight kind of like a power lifter, where I know if my first 5 rep opener was at 315 this week, maybe 2 months later it's still 315 because that's my best head in the game tracked set. But maybe my third set of 5 is 425 this week, and then 430 the next week, and 435 the next week. And I'm just inching up that 5 rep set so that my 2 rep max, could jump a little bit more. So I may be creating more space between sets on some areas, but then shortening it on other areas, all based on that particular goal for that particular workout to train like a powerlifter. Again, from that bodybuilding hypertrophy mindset, but within that context, it's all about the lift. Then the next week, I'm doing high rep supersets with leg press, hack squats, goblet squats, leg extensions, hamstring. I'm doing all of the accessory work. So there's still a lot of stimulation, but it's from different angles, different energy systems, so that I have 2 full weeks to recover from that heavy squat. And I'm telling you, I still have not met a competitor that hasn't gone through this kind of flow that has not had lifetime best strength achievements. It's just everybody's coming from that place of overtraining, it seems. No matter who we are, where we are, we just always come into it with a little bit too much.
Yeah.
And as soon as you back people down, get that extra recovery time in there, let them focus on performance, not just how many times you feel like you want to be in the gym. It makes a huge difference.
So on your squat day, you won't do anything else. You'll just squat.
Well, I would do stiff-legged deadlifts as well. So kind of
Okay.
on that day, it was Romanian deadlifts. So like even if you back up into my deadlifting day, that's that central movement. So I start with deadlifting, I'm warming up, I finish that, and then I may just pick another exercise like low cable rows and do 4 or 5 sets just to really get some lat activation, maybe a set of chin-ups to failure. But there's not a lot of hypertrophy work on that day.
Mm-hmm.
Squats, same. I mean, it's just squat, heavy Romanian deadlift, also tracked for weight, also looking for increases. And then the rest of that work, comes into play. And I don't know if you've, first of all, genetics are genetics. So I can't claim, any amazing attributes here, but I don't think me being known in my entire career just for my legs, people have talked about my quads and adductors and even hamstrings. I just don't think I would have ever achieved that kind of freakiness without both that core strength work as well as all of the hypertrophy stuff. I mean, we did some crazy stuff, and I think you just need that combination of intensity and strength.
Well, there you have it, guys. That answers that. One more really quick question before we wrap it up. But what is your take on high fat diets such as like keto versus like high carb diets versus high protein such as like the carnivore diet? Like, what do you think a balance is more key, or do you think there's benefits to each in certain situations, like cutting versus bulking versus whatever?
Yeah, so this is one that we could spend entire podcast on every variable, but
Maybe we should.
well, yeah, we'll follow up
Yeah.
with that. But in general, everything we've talked about so far has been very much based in just pure physiology. It's not one particular study or one concept. It's just this is how the body works. And we know if you do just a high fat carnivore or ketogenic diet, that you can adapt to that. You can become up to 40% better, more efficient at using fat for energy. But that just means that you're better at low carb dieting. Doesn't mean you've done the best thing for your body. There are absolutely no convincing studies that have done long-term inpatient data work that show that a carb-free or low-carb ketogenic type diet is superior. It's not superior for fat loss. It's not superior for muscle gain. It's the worst when it comes to sustainability and creating binge eating disorders. It's the most horrible thing for brain acuity and sharpness. There's just nothing good about it, except for if you want to be in kind of an anti-aging, um, you know, non-inflammatory type diet. So this is why, people always say, well, hey, if it's good enough for stage 4 cancer patients, or if it's good enough for people with seizures, maybe we should all eat that way. Well, maybe if you want to suffer all of those consequences, if you don't want to have the best metabolic capacity, you don't want to have the most muscle mass, you don't want to have the happiest life, if you want to suffer with binge eating disorder, then sure, go ahead and try it. But I think you can achieve your best performance. Matter of fact, I know research supports that a proper amount of carbohydrate with a moderate amount of fat, and with protein, it's all about getting that threshold up to the most you can utilize, but then more is not better. Once you have the minimum levels of protein that your body needs, which could be anywhere from 2 to 3 times the RDA, as research concludes, then extra calories from protein don't help, but putting those calories toward more carbohydrates really do. So, fat is one of those things where if you look at somebody eating 15% of their calories from fat, or 20 or 25 or 30, there's a range in there where preference can play a part. But when you get a super high fat diet, it actually reduces testosterone levels. It does increase atherosclerosis. I'm sad to say that a lot of people who are very high proponents of ketogenic dieting and they spend their whole life saying it's the healthiest thing, most of those guys have died in their 50s of heart attacks. I mean, that's just a fact.
Atkins, right? Didn't
Including
Atkins
Dr. Atkins, yes.
Yeah, like and people still follow that diet and just call it keto now.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's just, you got to have enough carbs. Management is the key. Sometimes you need more, sometimes you need less, but to completely push them out the door is a bad move. I just think that, the research is there. You just have to pick the right voices to listen to understand it.
Right. So really quick, just to wrap this up. Someone just starting out, starting to track macros, what is a general guideline, like a good balance? Like, would you say like 20 fat, 30 protein, 50 carbs, or what would kind of breakdown be in percentage wise?
I'm a little bit more scientific. I mean, I think some of those breakdowns are okay, but like I said, 2 times the RDA for protein is what is kind of the acceptable minimum for people. And I'm not talking about like general population clients, that kind of thing, but for somebody who's really trying to perform their best and gain muscle. So I go by increments of maybe 2 times the RDA for protein, 2.5 times, up to 3 times. Some research has tried to see if 4 or 5 times the RDA is helpful, and there's just such a short amount of data there in terms of how many people does that really benefit. And so it's really that 2 to 3 times RDA range. Then for fat, I do like to kind of look at percentages because I think that's easy once protein is met. If you're dieting, maybe 15 to 20% of calories from fat. If you're not dieting, 20 to 30, maybe 35 if you just really prefer more fat than carbs. And then the
Easy to
rest,
get down. Yeah.
yeah, then the rest ends up being about what you said, 40, 50, 60% from carbs.
Awesome. Well, I did act really quick. I did actually notice when I switched from high protein to a high carbohydrate diet, my strength, my focus, my sleep was better. And my body composition actually changed quite a bit, and I stayed leaner and got bigger, and I just noticed my body composition was a lot better. So something to try. If you are on a very high protein diet, maybe substitute some of those out for carbs, obviously all based on your goals. There's a ton of variables out there. So if you need help with that, contact either me or Joe, and we would be happy to help. I'm going to leave all of Joe's information in the bottom as well as mine. And thank you guys so much for watching, and see you guys on the next episode.